Hi, welcome. My name is Leire ASENSIO, and I'm Senior Lecturer in Architecture and Urban Design at the MSD. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which this meeting is taking place, which may be multiple lands given the location of all of you. I pay my respect to both past and present, and extend that respect to other Indigenous Australians present. Cristina Díaz Moreno and Efren GARCIA GRINDA are principals and founders of amid.cero9, founded in 1997 as a collaborative platform to investigate the intersections between architecture, culture, and nature. The practice has evolved into research-based design practice focused on contemporary urban, technological, and cultural challenges. Intensely committed to the development of methodological disciplinary processes, amid.cero9's projects combine constructive precision with conceptual clarity and uncover the specific opportunities and spatial nature of each context, cultivating an approach to the contemporary notion of a space that enlists sociology, technology, media, and politics. They are professors and directors of the Studio One in the Institute of Architecture at the Agavante in Vienna, succeeding Zaha Hadid and Kazuyo Sejima. They have taught extensively and are visiting lecturers at Princeton University, and have taught at Harvard, where Diploma Unit Masters at the Architectural Association for many years, the Akademie der Bildenden in Kunst in Vienna, the State of School in Frankfurt, and at the ZAM and at SAIA at the Universidad Europea de Madrid. Their work is part of the permanent collection of the Pompidou Center in Paris, and they have been exhibited at the Architectural Biennale in Venice, among many others. Their projects have been widely disseminated, and they have won more than 40 prizes in national and international competitions. The projects and writings were documented in 2014 in a publication entitled Third Natures, a micropedia, and an exhibition at DIAZ in London. Recently, a monographic issue on their work have been published in El Croquis, and their work on public space have been presented in a solo show entitled Vaults, Beds, Gardens at Princeton University. They have recently built the Institución Libre de Enseñanza headquarters for Giner de los Ríos Foundation in Madrid, for which they have received several major prizes as well. And it was recently acclaimed by Sir Norman Foster as wonderful breath of fresh air and inspirational. Please help me welcome tonight Cristina and Efren.
Hello everyone. Well, first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. Well, to not be here, but more or less being there in Australia. It was an old dream to go to Australia. It's a pity that we are just in Vienna now, but it's very, very nice to share our work with you, with all of you. Thank you, Leire, for insisting, and it's our pleasure to just be with you, Leire and David. We met and we have been very close since many years ago, but very far, like technically, because they are living now in the other part of the planet. Well, I'm going to start saying that the title of this lecture on Other Cosmographies is a very important way of understanding for us this work, Cosmographies, is very close to the way of thinking, our way of doing and designing projects, because we are always, all the time, trying to base our decisions in the construction of inner logics of little cosmographies or words, if you want. Okay, so I was saying that cosmographies is a very important word for us, and we are always looking around, trying to understand our world around and all the complexity, and like putting things together and constructing inner logic. So this is basically the way of describing all our projects. Today, we are going to see Giner de los Ríos Foundation, and we are going to be describing basically Giner de los Ríos Foundation, but coming in and out and talking about other projects that were done in parallel during a long process of construction and well, a long process of many things that happened during many years. This is the life of architecture. Normally, times are very, very long. And in parallel, we were doing many things in the academia and also in our office. And we are going to talk a bit about certain projects that were in parallel. Today, we are going to visit gardens, we are going to talk about animals and paradises, and we are going to talk about also buildings. So let me go. this is the exhibition that we did in Princeton, where we were also talking about these vaults, beds, and gardens. So this understanding of something material like vaults or architecture, something more hedonic or hedonistic like beds and comfortable way of living a good life, and gardens and other species and other animals. And as I said, we are going to talk about this project that is the Free Institution for Education, could be the translation, Institución Libre de Enseñanza. And as I said also, we had a very long process during our lives, and we were not able to show the project during many, many years. It was not published because we had a contract of confidentiality. And now it's alive after. It's like seeing one children that was your children and now is having their own life, but it was long, long ago when we did it. But anyway, it is an important way of explaining our way of working. Then in here, in the center of the image, you have Giner de los Rios, and he was he was like the head of one group of people that wanted to wanted to change the society teaching the children. They thought that if you teach the young people, you are really teaching the whole society. But of course, it was not well seen, and they were just sanctioned and suspended for, well, when they were pleading for academic freedom, they were suspended from the university, and then they just decided to establish the Educación Libre de Enseñanza. In this, around them, all the most important cultural figures were forming, like, well, Dalí or many important poets, and even Nobel Prizes. And in here, you can see this is where the Giner de los Rios was living, and now the foundation is constructed. And well, everything, when the Spanish War started, Franco took the property, took the library. The library was burned, and everything almost disappeared. And many of them just went to exile. And only when the democracy resumed, only in that moment, this property was recovered, and then we did the competition. And in the competition, the brief was asking for a space or a building for someone that was a very contemporary thinking, or what was a person that had a very contemporary mind in that moment, more than 100 years ago. So our answer to the brief and our answer to the architectural approach was how a contemporary mind could be, or what a space could be more sensible or more meaningful nowadays. And we didn't want to have a kind of a nostalgic approach to the history or repeating things coming from the history, but trying to understand how this way of thinking could be brought to the contemporary moment.
Also because they were very well known in Madrid, where the Institución Libre de Enseñanza was founded, as people that were like also practicing a very special way of life. In fact, they were like called the secular monks. But let us start by saying that the notion of a space is a crucial aspect for us. So, but as Leire was saying in the presentation, it's quite a contemporary one. It could be for us defined as this complex interwoven network of interrelationships between different agents that are like coexisting in the very same place. So in a way, it's a very complex place where an immense amount of interactions between not only humans but other species as well are overlapped. You know, it's like it's this space that we are like somehow sharing now virtually, but it's the space of interaction between many different agents, alive and non-alive ones. And obviously is purely, it's opposed to a purely passive notion of reception. No, it's nothing to do with something like being a visitor or being a viewer. Space for us is presented then as a space of intermediation. In a way, is the experience of ourselves being part of a situation under permanent construction, and being as well within that scene. And then we understood at a certain point with Ginés de los Ríos, with this project, that the context that traditionally has been linked to a physical place and to the remainings in that physical place of a certain culture, instead of being related with that physicality, could be more associated with a group of people, or if you want to have subculture that is having a common identity. It's a group of individuals with a common identity, with a common material world, objects, interrelationship with technology, and a common culture. So in a way, realizing that if the space is a phenomenon of interaction between different agents, it would be fundamental to firstly define, identify who the actors in this mutual set of interrelations are. Basically, so we started basically to think that the difficulties that architecture has as a discipline to identify and to characterize ourselves, humans, beyond the usual abstract and generic characterizations such as people, labor force, public, multitude, or users, is simply a problem of ontology and how we can, by thinking about the people that would be interacting within the spaces that we're designing, we could maybe understand how to deal with them. So coming back to Ginés de los Ríos, we had a very interesting problem in there. You see them in here, like practicing one of these excursions that they were bringing the students to the nearby mountain range. That is, how to connote in architecture, how to approach this alive piece of history in the Spanish culture, and how to make it without a direct allusion, without reconstructing or wanting to recall or recover totally, what they were doing, because a long time has passed or had passed. And obviously, there were descendants, but many of the people that were involved in this piece of the Spanish history was like not anymore in there. So basically, we found a possible answer in Ginés de los Ríos himself and his understanding of the landscape. So I will be doing a brief introduction to this because it's a fascinating one. It was a completely modern and almost proto-ecological one. Remember that the institution was founded in 1847. And at that time was almost a proto-ecological one that considered landscape as a cultural construct, meaning that the landscape and culture have a reciprocal and bionivocal influence one to another. This approach was a mixture between a geographical understanding, borrowing many ideas and following Alexander von Humboldt's approach to nature, and a pure experiential one, coming from this romantic idea of being confronted with the landscape and the immensity of the territory. And this was approached by them, with also the students, that they thought that excursions were like a really important key point of the education of the students, as a sensible reception, as an experience of the landscape itself through a social and scientific wandering. He also says with this, there is the rugged beauty of the Castilian landscape that is not green, as you see, is not a beautiful, supposedly landscape, but through his eyes was mainly poor lands, sad, golden lands of a barren nature and an intense beauty for them. So basically, also, we were like reading, obviously, many things about them, and the direct contact with things was specifically for Ginés de los Ríos a really important thing. And the direct contact with landscape was one of the most important and intense pedagogical tools for them. So basically, they were, having this kind of marvelous thoughts about, the idea that every child should have at least 1 cubic meter of free and free air, free in terms of pollution, in direct relationship with nature. And but also the ideas that they had about the way the educational spaces should be set up with direct natural light, very much in the fashion that will be coming afterwards in the 30s of the 20th century. Next, please. So basically what we did, and that's our reading of what we could do in there, was an inversion of the targets. Basically, instead of the building itself, the one that you're seeing on the left, what it was like the center of the project was the reconstruction of the garden itself. A garden that was destroyed, and there was not only few written descriptions of it, and it started to be the conceptual and the material center of the project for us. The building was just what it was giving shape to it, stepping back and just becoming a background for it, basically. So we just started with the definition of the garden during the period of the competition, and we selected different densities, locations, rhythms of growth to foster the anarchic distribution of resources among plants and trees. The garden is basically constructed by a series of alive and inanimate materials overlapping layers, from the different grounds and floors, the irrigation, the construction and technical and augmented soil, the species of the understory and their arrangement in a geometric grid that you saw, the canopy with bigger species and so on. So everything was meant to produce wildness and the naturalness, I would say, of the wild, based on the competition for the resources between different species, between the different vegetable species that we planted in there. We started with a dense horizontal layering on the south part of the garden that you see on the bottom of the image, and an empty space in which the garden was growing vertically within the facades of the building, basically. And then, in order to recreate the sullen, stern, and hostile beauty of the Castilian plateau in wintertime, the garden had to be deciduous, and the mid-sized plants needed to be pruned in order to facilitate the vertical growth of what in ecology is called the basal epicormic shoots. So everything, as I was trying to explain, as a fragment of an artificially constructed ecology, savage or wild, because it seems barely maintained and it's not easily understandable, even though it's a clear and really strict geometrical logic to it, totally away from any formal criteria. So we're seeing now a video that was like so in a way it's a bit more, 2 years ago, 1.5 years. It's a fragment of an artificially constructed ecology, basically, as we were describing. So, as the Castilian Plateau for Giner, the garden is not green except for a few weeks, but purple, coral, and silver, as you see. We used the only existing written record of the original garden that we were referring to select the species contained in the new one, recalling the ones found in the nearby mountain range and the aforementioned plateau, the Castilian plateau. You see you saw the geometrical grid pits, the grid of pits in the garden during the process of plantation. The sequence of a wild, naked garden of sprouts during the winter is slowly flowering in the spring and reaching a frugal aesthesis and compacted, saturated mass of greenery that recalls basically the vegetal demography and the dynamics of Giner de los Rios landscapes. So it seems then clear that apart from us, we can start understanding a space as something shared with other species. It was clear in this case in the Giner de los Rios Foundation. Then apart from us, who are these other actors, that we can interact with? Who are those invited actors to this mutual set of interrelations that constitute what we call third natures?
Since the very beginning in our office, since the very beginning when we were already working together, Efren and I, we thought that architecture is not only this materiality, these heavy weights that is concrete or bricks or glass, is also made by many actors, many other species, as Efren explained. And in this competition, we proposed, it's almost 20 years ago now, 18 years ago, we already proposed to construct the architecture based on putting species together, constructing this vertical garden that attracted flights and butterflies, birds and butterflies. And in here, you are watching, if it's working, a video is not working. Anyway, I'll come back. So a video that we did for the Venice Biennale, when we were explaining that architecture can be constructed, can be produced by other species. So if it's not working, I can go to the next one. Another project, we have done many projects, always trying to put together not only geometries, but also alive species like in Ginebra or Rios. And in this case, the proposal for the Energy Museum, National Energy Museum in León, in Ponferrada, was based on constructing an ecosystem, a total, complete ecosystem inside, not even inside. The building was floating on top of this inner lobby where the Carboniferous species, because that was the base related with the Carboniferous forest, were living underneath, converting the lobby in a, not even in a greenhouse, but much more alive part of the building that is, as you can see in the image, is it was possible to make to have an efficient energy system, but also a very natural, in between natural and artificial space.
Maybe it's more obvious. I was referring to this title. Maybe it's more obvious for you now why we were at certain point interested in this term, third natures. That was not by us. It wasn't coined by us, but was coined in the 16th century by a priest, an Italian priest called Jacopo Bonfario. That was basically the counterpoint to first and second natures. Second nature was used since Tito to coin or to be referring to the, I would say, practical manipulations of nature. And he needed to invent a word to be referring to the new Renaissance gardens that were like, appearing at that time, in Italy. That were not having only a new, I would say, materiality, this combination of natural and artificial things that we were referring to, but it was also something that needed to be experienced. And more importantly, they were culturally produced and received. Remember that the references to classical culture and mythology were crucial in these particular gardens. And, he was also referring to or trying to contest the material, geometrical, and functional understanding of built environment, of architecture, if you want, throughout gardens as a necessary counterpart to discuss the own implications of architecture. Obviously in gardens, you cannot be dealing with exact geometries, there are always ever changing. They're like alive, so you cannot control that much about them. So in a way, it's a model that served to us to discuss also the material, cultural, and geometrical implications of architecture. So, but also this liberating ourselves from this narrow-minded understanding of the relationship with human actions, with functions, that has been in a way influencing very much, the modern architecture and nowadays architecture as well, obviously. In our case, this understanding how we rethink, about how we think about the relationship between human activities and space is pretty much about spatial configurations that are having a very strong somehow definition, but in a way they're allowing many things to happen within the spaces themselves, in a way replicating not only this garden somehow organizations or spaces, but also these great examples of history in which you cannot assign a function to each of these spaces.
And in this case, in this building, in the Institución Libre de Enseñanza, the spatial configuration is an extremely important one, because we, on the one hand, we try to understand the existing or the remaining pieces of architecture that were in the site, and this is the pavilion Macpherson, a little pavilion inside the garden, and then somehow working with this fragmented notion of rooms, little rooms, not that big, small scale around a garden. And then the project, this is the model that we did for the competition, or very similar at least. The project is based on constructing pavilions around a garden, following the scale of Macpherson pavilion, and all of them connected in a kind of a perimeter that is one building, but is perceived as many pavilions.
A super long building, basically.
And then also these pavilions, the geometry of these pavilions towards the garden is broken, is fragmented, and is also this angle inclined sides are also working with the changing or just transforming the scale that you perceive in the garden. Now you are seeing the very, very young garden. This is at least 4 or 5 years ago, when it was really almost nothing. Now you can't see the buildings when it's springtime and summertime, springtime especially. Therefore, as I said, it is not a building, it's the construction of this garden and these rooms around it. And in here, internally, you can see these rooms. All of them are like not having a point. They are not like classrooms with one point, focal point, and one person talking, but they are absolutely open and continuous to the surroundings, having this very, very continuous perception of the garden all the time, and these bigger than normal corridors where the students can work before and after the class. Also, there is a system of layering, as you can see in the video. There are like 3-4 layers that play with the vision, play with like making or being able to have a dark space, but also having this openness to the garden. Efren will explain a bit later the lattice. So you can see here a specialized thick dividing wall where all the vertical connections, staircases, the elevators and ancillary rooms are placed. Here you can see one part of it, some of them.
And a similar notion really with the spatial organization of these rooms around the garden was explored in the needed auditorium. More than 250 people. 250. Yeah, 250 people. So it's basically a landscape of rooms situated just underneath, the main void within the garden, where the garden is growing vertically. And it's organized by these rooms that are surrounding the big room, inverting the way and that they're related on the ground floor. This is one story underneath the garden level. And the gradation between the interior and the exterior of the classrooms is translated with an somehow kind of identical shape, identical dimensions, but different kind of set of relations between the different spaces. So we change completely the materiality so that the different rooms are looking into the main stage through these large cyclopean eyes, that you're perceiving in here. These rooms can be open or closed to expand the auditorium. That was the idea. And the shape of the frames of these strabismic openings or eyes that look one another are also acting as the beams that hold the metal columns of the upper classrooms on top of them, right? So these inclinations are related with this fact of cantilevering somehow and holding the columns on top. Exploring the consequences in a way of using exactly the same spatial arrangement, but inverting the organization, playing with the way the rooms are interconnected, so that you can see how these eyes are looking one at each other. And whenever you are in one of them, you don't know if you're looking at the mirror, or you're looking at the stage, or you're looking through different holes, one to another, to different people. So having a very special relationship. This was coming from kind of our very first lecture at the AA, that was like we discovered there was this kind of weird lateral room that can be open for bigger audiences as well.
In this coming project, we were also working with a spatial organization, but totally in an opposite way. If Giner de los Ríos is based on constructing a garden, this project was based on constructing the end of the pilgrimage and a piece that with the volume and presence and materiality is having a presence in the valley. This is the Jerte Valley in the south part of Madrid, in Extremadura.
Well, not Madrid, but Spain.
Well, Extremadura is kind of South Madrid, not super south.
Southwest. Yeah.
And in this competition, what we proposed, this was a competition for a not very big building, 1,000 square meters in the middle of nowhere in a huge, massive landscape. And it was asked to do an auditorium. And we proposed to do something that is not exactly an auditorium. It's more like a chapel, like lost in the landscape, where certain moments of the year can happen, events and fiestas, because that was for the cherry blossom festival. And then we thought we can construct something very tiny, but it's going to be an haptic space, an inner space where something can be, where people can share the space on the one hand, but it's also the end of the pilgrimage during the festival. That's why as you can see in this image, is about having a presence, but also going there ritualistically and entering inside during the moments of the party. And then you can see that the holes, these big holes, were done thinking about the light, thinking about the views and the entrances to the Cherry Blossom Palace. You can see here that is based on, as I said, the spatial organization is a very simple one. It's based on a central space and one ring around where things can happen. The ring is the foyer. The ring is is having the vertical connections and also the little toilets and other programs. And this is the ring and the underneath spaces under construction. And in here also you can see in this physical model that the staircase and the ramp is totally out of scale. It's huge, it's massive, because it's the end of this pilgrimage when people is going to the Cherry Blossom Palace. Here you can see the foyer. Those are the rooms excavated underneath.
And also so it's basically a concrete ring, which is this, as in the pilgrimage churches, is just surrounding the main space. There is this end of the pilgrimage throughout. These two ramps, one connected to the underneath level and one to the first floor. So this concrete ring is surrounded by a non-structural lower part of steel pieces, and basically on top of it, there is a metal structure continuing this non-structural one underneath. So in the bottom part, the ring surrounded by non-structural, and the top part, this dome-like shape or structure, where we introduced these big openings that Cristina was referring to connect the interior of the dome with the significant points of the surrounding landscape, but also to produce, in a way, the entrances to the space. But also, obviously, this was drastically changing the mechanical behavior of the dome. So basically, whenever you are introducing these big holes, and where supposedly they shouldn't be, we needed to bend the surface towards the interior to both modulate the light, was the idea, and to introduce the stiffness needed to re-stabilize the structural behavior of the dome, and thus the forming and transformation, the tessellation of the surface of the pieces that were covering these ceramic pieces that were covering the space. The interior is a big room, understood as a three-dimensional structure of interwoven steel plates that ensure the similar behavior of a dome, and is replicated, as you've seen here, towards the inside, with a mosaic of rhomboid figures that serve to fine-tune the acoustics of the whole. And as you see in these images from the upper steel structure under construction.
As I said, the building that was asked in the brief, well, one politician promised an auditorium, but the building that was asked in the brief is a building that remains closed during almost the whole year and is open only a few days or few weeks in a year. And that's why we propose some kind of a weird typology. It's not a typology that is an urban auditorium or a place where people is going every single day, but it's a more kind of, we always describe it as a contemporary chapel.
Coming back to General de los Rios, you saw in those previous images the lattice. This lattice acts as a filter between the inner spaces that are not exactly classrooms, because the building is not anymore an institutional, an educational institution, but is more a multi-purpose building dedicated to culture. So they're acting as a light veil. But also, we were like working with this this notion that was like somehow discovered by one of the, I would say, fellow scientists that were like very much connected with the institution itself, that is Santiago Ramón y Cajal. For those who don't know, you know, his drawings, he was a Nobel Prize, one of the few Nobel Prizes of the Spanish. That were Spanish, is the father of modern neurobiology, and was a Nobel Prize, as I said, and personally and scientifically quite close to the institution. Even though most of the physiological principles of binocular vision were known in the mid 19th century, Ramón and Cajal investigated, you know, around the time that the institution was founded, the optical chiasm of mammals, the X, where our optical nerves are crossing one another. With these fabulous drawings that he was drawing, you know.
The previous one.
Yeah, the previous, not the one, obviously, which is fundamental in the process called stereopsis, which is the basis of human perception of depth and distance, if you want, of the perception of space. So basically, is to make the story short, because it's kind of complicated but fascinating. You know, what is happening is that in our brain, there is a process that is mixing the images coming from our both eyes, making a process of deletion. So we're like, it's called confusion, and it's basically that you're selectively deleting part of the information which is contradictory from both eyes, to create that sense of depth. So basically, what we did is an experiment with the lattice. From the exterior, you're perceiving it as a solid, almost solid, dense element. But from the interior itself, based on the visual predominance of the background, which is usually having more light, which is the garden, the diameter of the bars and the distance that are perceived are basically blurred, you know, through this process of confusion, and magically the lattice from the interior disappears. It's more like this kind of sensation of being within a room and having a light rain that doesn't impede the complete vision of the garden, in this case of the exterior, but it's blurring a little bit, you know, its perception. creating or highlighting or enforcing the sense of concentration that you're like usually having in a rainy day.
Just to describe this, because it's super difficult to take pictures of this effect. When you are inside, you really perceive the garden as a continuation. It's not what you see now in the image that looks like very dense.
So basically, how it is done is that we're not, in these lattices, we're not having any frame to them. So they're like 1,000 different panels that are working with the density of the bars and the position of the bars. So no one is different, is equal to the next one. And it's composed by 3 layers, you know, that acts as filters of also the sunlight, but also producing this kind of effects. 3 layers that are attach one another with these kind of horizontal brackets. So what you're perceiving is just this kind of elongated lines in front of yourself, and from the interior that are magically disappearing. And it's based because of the distance to the perceiver, right? In the corners, the bars are coming into and they're welded with the ones that are cut through to make these clean edges that you were seeing in the previous image. And here you see the perception from the exterior itself, how the whole building is cladded with these 1,000 different panels that you cannot perceive, you know, what are the joints between them. And from the exterior, where like the densities are varying, you know, to modulate the views, to unveil and reveal from the exterior more or less, you know, the interior spaces, and also to block this direct sun radiation, you know, enter into the spaces.
And as I said before, internally it's very continuous, and this is the effect also at night when everything is switched on and then is transformed into the opposite effect. And this project, Clunia, this Clunia Archaeological Center in Peñalba de Castro in Burgos, was also based on working in the definition of the space and the geometry based on the vision, based on the perception. And in this competition, we proposed to give shape literally to these kind of spaces that are related with the landscape and to produce this connection with the view and the landscape and the geometry. And well, as you can see, the building is just an horizontal slab, a concrete slab elevated on top of the ground. And underneath, you can see in the physical model, there is a set of bolts, bolts, that are constructing rooms underneath with this perpendicular vision cone that is also structurally necessary. And in the interior, the rooms, you can see in the upper part of the image, the section, the rooms are defined by the walls, and it's a very simple spatial organization based on the connection with the existing, with the like a former place that is the Celtiberian settlement, origin of this city, and in
the Roman city that we didn't explain, that it was a visitor center for a Roman city, the ruins of a Roman city.
So in here you can see that also this slab is a continuation of the landscape, and in here you see the cell. What we proposed was a concrete cell beams with these variable widths that are also intersected with these holes that you are watching in the drawing, based on the big dimension, the big dimension, the depth of the building, that could be a very dark space, and that is why also we introduced these skylights intersecting the geometry and constructing an inner space with those. And from the landscape and from the road, what you can see is only one line, almost not perceptible in relationship with this thing here. That is the origin of the place.
Well, you see, this idea of, I hope that it's working. Yes, a little bit. This idea of giving shape to the space based on the site of movement, that was the way Giner de los Rios used to describe their excursions through the landscapes comes again to the Institución Libre de Enseñanza. So you're seeing the position and that the position and the size of the rooms were precisely determined by the path that is an S path entering into the garden, basically. So that if you imagine that instead of having the visual cone, you know, and your eyes being screens receiving somehow information, if you think about them as something that is carved in space, that's the way precisely we determined the size, the volume, the massing, and the inclinations of every single thing to be not only being excavated in certain diagonals to lighten the building and to not having to perceive it as a continuous one that is just fragmented pavilions, but also to, in a way, recreate the sense of enclosure of the garden, but having views constantly to the nearby buildings and cityscape, as you see in here. Basically, it's just, if we consider your eyes, instead of screens, as I was saying, a kind of erosion tool, you will be able to give shape to these diagonals that we were talking about. And in a way, trying to overlap, you know, these continuous layers of greenery, you know, changing color, the lattice, the interior, and also the background buildings belonging to the city around.
We are going to enter now in the building. It's very difficult to explain the perception of this walking throughout the garden. Moreover, it's very difficult to just explain this when I am talking to my computer and I don't see any face. Hopefully it will work. Otherwise, you can always come to Madrid to visit the building with us. But we are going to enter through in between the existing building that was the former house of Giner de los Rios on the right, and then now we are discovering the garden, and we are going to walk through the path that is doing an S to make it bigger and perceptibly longer. You can see on the right the Macpherson Pavilion, already refurbished, and walking through underneath now the trees, they are even bigger than in this video. And then at the rear, in the back part of the garden, we can see the upper roof of the auditorium that is excavated underneath. It's the bigger space and is hidden. And then you can discover the auditorium going through or going down in this big, huge, massive staircase and entering to the hidden part. This is the staircase from down. And as I was explaining before, all these folding and inclined lattices are breaking all the time the perception of the building. And as I said also in spring, you can't see.
But also they're tinted with both the green color of the greenery of the vegetable species on this half part of it and the color of the sky on the top part. So,
just to
close no, this talk today.
And open maybe a questions, and I wish to see faces.
So we were trying to describe throughout this visit to the Institución Libre de Enseñanza and throughout the projects that somehow were developed, some of them in the office, some of the projects that we were developing in the office in parallel, we were trying to describe buildings as small cosmographies, as something that is reflecting not only our own obsessions, you know, self-referential things happening within the buildings, but also the wall around, in this case, the wall of a Spanish piece of history. Their ideas about education, that in a way buildings could become self-contained microcosmoses that could reflect a particular understanding of the world and could be in a way that was our desire when we did the competition and we completed the building, could establish affective relations with objects, subjects, and nature by embodying them physically in certain cases and virtually, throughout, this system of links to things that were connected with the Institución Libre de Enseñanza. And in doing so, this materialized microcosmoses could provide a small-scale alternative to the social and spatial order in the same way that the gardens and pavilions of the original Institución Libre de Enseñanza, the Free Institution for Education, did during 60 years until the arrival of the Spanish Civil War and the dictatorship. In a way, proposing, in other words, alternative notions of beauty, which is the basis of this project, based on this wall connected with the Institución Libre de Enseñanza, and based on a deep appreciation and understanding of the world around, selectively reconstructing and reenacting our bonds with things around, constructing carefully the experience of these spaces, in our case, with intellectual ambition, but also with kind of fiscal commitment and attitude.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Hi, you are still there.
Yes, we are back. Thank you, Cristina and Efren, for a...
It's really weird.
I know, it's... I know. Sorry about that, but thanks a lot, because it was all communicated very clearly. I mean, thank you for a fantastic and very, very inspiring lecture. I enjoyed it thoroughly, and we are getting questions for you now coming through the chat. Do you want to go with first? Okay. Yeah. So we have one from Professor Donald Bates. So I'll just read it. With the relation of the rooms in the first project, with multiple layers to the glazing and screens to the rooms, the shifting of focus and hierarchy in how these rooms might be used, and the central role of the landscape, are you pushing the concept or sensibility that foreground and background are reversible, exchangeable, or even always in flux? Do your projects have foregrounds or backgrounds?
Well, we architects tend to think about architecture as the foreground in a way, because it's the thing that we are dedicating our lives to. So it's basically the things that we are designing, but in fact should be, in our opinion, in a way stepping back, stepping back, and you see the building is not a very simple one. It's having a lot of shape, it's having a lot of formal development. It's just, it has taken a lot of work to become a background, to the garden. That was the basic idea, and I think this fluctuation between foreground and background is just also I would say a metaphor in our opinion to our everyday lives that should be put in the center of the architectural practices. It's just simply that, buildings are artificial environments for us humans and for other species as well. And should be just this, it's like stepping back a little bit and giving importance to ourselves, to how we can be related with other, species around as well. Well, yes, yeah.
Yeah. So let's see. Well, one thing, maybe I'll try and slip in a question in between when the public asks questions. But one of the things that we enjoyed very much is this idea of the third nature that you have kind of adopted as a very strong concept, and it has a big effect on your work. It seems to be asking for a reconsideration of the typical conventions of how we operate as architects. It seems to be asking us to go wider and into the idea of the environment and atmosphere as the things that we're kind of constructing in some sense. So I know in many ways you are making a claim for your own work and for dealing with very specific cosmologies, in this case, the de los Rios. But do you think, do you see your work as having the capacity for wider reverberance for the discipline, so it can actually ripple out and have a wider consequence for the discipline to extend it into areas that, address the contemporary concerns of the environment, or extending our view, I guess, as architects.
Absolutely, it's what we're trying as educators to do. It's basically, it's not throughout our own practice that obviously is having as important parallel life in the educational world, educating students to be aware of these connections with other things and to really rethink the way we do design and project the artificial environment. So that cannot be, and it's a clear evidence, cannot be anymore like it was like 20, 25 years ago. We should have different considerations, but not only regarding, contemporary challenges, these pandemics or the global warming issue, but many others that are hidden as well. So that if we are capable to introduce within the design processes those concerns through carefully studying the architectural implications of those, we will be capable to, in a way, to produce differently architecture, and somehow more connected with the world around. That is something that from the very beginning was obsessing us when we started our practice together.
We also very much apologize that it's only our faces that you're seeing, Cristina. So there's definitely an audience out there. So one anonymous attendee has asked, I guess now that the Ríos del Río Foundation has been up for a while, have you found that animals like birds are nesting in the external veil? Is that encouraged? What about the other creatures? Do you see an appearance of them?
No, definitely it's super alive, and there are many birds, and if of course it's not only encouraged. Of course, the gardener, he's all the time fighting to establish the boundaries, but it's full of life. Birds, little sparrows, they are living very nicely in there, and of course, yes.
Many other bird species as well. Yeah, it is. It's just simply a pleasure. And I see that another attendee was asking about the reception of the public. Is that something really, really proud of? Even though the building can be perceived as a very abstract, a building, and difficult for, I would say, non-architects to be experiencing it. One of the things that we are more proud of, I was saying, is most of the people, and obviously there is people that hates it, as many other.
Not that many,
but some, few, I would say. But most of the people that is entering, what they're saying is, I don't understand it. I have no idea what I'm seeing, but I like it.
Not architects.
Not architects.
That is very nice.
So the combination of the garden, the building itself, the auditorium, the spaces inside, and so on. They're they like these spaces. They feel that they're in front of a different kind of building in a way, but the environment is pleasant.
And also during the process of after winning the competition and during the process of development, it was very difficult to understand by our clients and in general many people around, because as in the pictures, it's very difficult to explain it with drawings. Very, very difficult. So only till the moment that it was almost finished, only till that moment, in general, nobody understood the building. And in that moment, our client said to us, did you expect this building to be like that? Because he realized that he liked, or they, because they are a big group of people, they like the building a lot. And now this is super alive. I mean, there are so many things happening in there, and
well, not now, but
not
before
before the lockdown, sadly.
But it's just simply, there is not only natural species, but it's just simply people entering and enjoying the place. It's something that happens with many buildings, but especially in this case, it's simply a pleasure to see people coming into, discovering this hidden space and enjoying it in there. Simply looking at the faces is something really nice.
Maybe we'll throw in one more question from us and then we'll ask more, but definitely another kind of term that you introduced, the idea of cosmologies, is very interesting. And we had the great pleasure of visiting one of your reviews when we were in Cambridge together, and at least from what we saw, there was a very deliberate idea to move the focus away from abstract ideas or general ideas of the social or the public. It was much more about being very specific about this idea of a collective inhabitation of space, and it's also its expression in architecture and landscape. Could you maybe tell us a little bit more about how this has informed a pretty long-running research, your research through teaching, because that's also a very remarkable part of your activity as well.
Well, it was like a moment, it was already 15 years ago that we decided to. So because there were many around us, and the world of architecture, our discipline, basically, there were many voices in a way claiming for a more or deeper social connection for architecture. Mm-hmm. So, and it was kind of constantly throughout the process, like participation many times, process that were like inviting people to participate in the design of buildings. And there was a moment that we thought, okay, let's do it seriously. What if we, for a while, put the center of our practice in the people itself? So in social practices, in everyday activities, and in the culture could be embedded in social groups and in social formation. So we dedicated quite a few years to this thing, making the students try to look for architectural implications in relation with those subjects. Just simply studying, taking a bit of time. That was crazy when we proposed this because nobody also understood why. But taking the lesson of the process that we were having throughout the General de los Ríos Foundation, because we didn't explain that very much, but we were not part of these people that were around this Institución Libre de Enseñanza, and for us was a big effort to just try to understand their culture, their way in that time, the way of living, because it was pretty difficult, very different from the usual one, the way they were teaching pupils, the way they were having relationships with culture. So it was almost a complete philosophical connection related with their everyday lives, I would say, with a and then we decided to go through it with our students, and I must say that was a very successful one, because then many considerations that you're having in your desk can be connected while practicing architecture, can be connected with these I would say social constructions that are happening around. In a way, it was for us a discovery, breaking the walls of the discipline. Has been claimed many times during the maybe 30, 40 years. But in our case was a discovery just how simply architecture could be connected with these social practices and become a tool for them instead of being just simply a disconnected art. And yeah.
Today, maybe we didn't explain that much, even though when Leire was introducing us, is clear. Our way of working in our discipline is being in the academia and having an office. So constructing and teaching and learning, I would say, more than teaching. And this is also very important for us. It's always very linked. So we are always trying to teach and trying to learn the things that we are doing in our office, or how we think in the academia is the same thing, but we also really understand our discipline as something to be materialized. We really love architecture, and our office is based on constructed buildings, so it's not a theoretical one. That is also important.
We have one more question from Professor Donald Bates. Clearly, the architecture can be used differently and the furniture fittings rearranged, but do you have a sense of controlling the landscape? Is it moving to a projected, proposed final state, or is it up to the gardener to determine its future shape and form? What is your sense of control and loss of control in the work?
Well, this is something that we are always working with our students. Is this word that is called affordance. So it's providing affordances. It's like constructing spaces where many things can happen. They are not basically based on a function, purely a function. So maybe, yes, it's true that we are always trying to construct atmospheres or environments that are open, I would say. They are not totally fixed.
And to do so, I think you're right. You know, it's about in a way getting the projects and please understand me, out of control. So you can block in certain moments, and our design methodology is also about this. You study, you research, you really take those connections with things around very seriously, and then you get into the design process with a fluctuation between total lack of control and total obsession for control. And this bouncing between the two of them makes the project more open, usually in our case, as Cristina is saying, offering more affordances. And you know, and then we leave things in a moment like they are for others to interpret. And that, you're right, the garden is doing many other things, is now cutting many plants. People is I mean, at a certain point we were asked to design the furniture, and we thought, I don't know, maybe it's good that the usual normal life enters, you know, within the building, and maybe ugly I mean, not totally designed, super nice furniture is entering into the, and we said, okay, maybe there's an opportunity for life to enter in the building and to transform it. And so we're not anymore in control of the space. We gave something and people is reinterpreting things. And we feel that's how life should be, simply. So yeah, we fluctuate between control and lack of control constantly.
That's right. Well, thank you very much, Cristina and Efren, for giving your time and giving a great talk. It's time. It's 8 o'clock now, so we'll move on. But thank you very much. So I think you guys are now in the most livable city in the world. We used to be the most livable city in the world. You're in Vienna now, so there's a rivalry. So thank you.
You're entering into the summer, and we are entering into the winter. That's makes your maybe a bit better.
But again, thank you very much. It was great to see your work again, and see you.
So now we'll
just our pleasure.
But next time you have to go.
Yes, we need to organize. We need to organize something that you can come physically here.
So just a couple of quick announcements. Before we go. So Thursday, 29th of October, that's in 2 days' time, at 12 o'clock Melbourne time, there'll be Charles Waldheim. So the new heliomorphism, that'll be hosted by us again. On Wednesday, the 29th of October at 6 o'clock, it'll be Jane Randell, who will be hosted by Helen Fisher. And Piyush Tiwari will be giving a talk on Wednesday, the 4th of November, on bank pricing of single-family residential home loans in Australia. And finally, I think Valerie Francis will be giving a talk on Thursday, the 5th of November, more than just add women and stir, reflections and current work on women in construction. Oh, and one more thing is that all the talks will be recorded, are recorded and actually uploaded onto YouTube. So please feel free to come and watch all the shows, MSD at Home lectures on YouTube. Okay, thank you very much.